Hello and welcome to the fifth Movie Sandbox tutorial, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how you can create your own animations and poses for Movie Sandbox. Now first, let's open up the scene that we saved in the cameras tutorial. I go to the system menu to load scene, click on tutorial scene, and here we have our character, Joe, who's performing two actions. He sets the camera to this little blue thing here, and he moves over to the target actor over here. Now, what we want him to do now is we want him to wave at the camera, and for this we need to create two poses. Now I switch into navigation mode and fly towards Joe so that I have a good look at him. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the posing toolset, which is down here. And the posing toolset allows you to switch through the character's bone structure and then rotate each individual bone to your liking. Now the first button here will select the character that you want to pose. So I click on it and then click on Joe. And the second and third button allow you to cycle through Joe's bones back and forth, and because we want him to wave, I'll just quickly cycle through to his upper arm. Now the fourth button is kind of the most important button because it's actually rotating the bone. Now I click on it, but instead of moving the mouse, I'm going to move everything by the keyboard. Maybe you remember from one of the first tutorials that I said that sometimes it's a lot easier to rotate by the keyboard because you rotate in each individual axis. Well, the same is true here. You can also rotate by the keyboard, and that way you can rotate much more controlled. Now I'm pressing the D and A key, and you see that I'm rotating in this one axis, or the W and S key, and I'm rotating in the second axis. Now, as you might know, because we're in three-dimensional space, there's always three axes that you can rotate to. There's also three axes that you can move to. Now, when I press and hold the Shift button, I gain access to the third axis that I don't have with W, A, S, and D. By holding Shift and pressing A or D, I can rotate around the third axis that I couldn't rotate around otherwise. Sort of what I'm going to do here now is something like this, where I will bring my arm up like that to generate the first pose for our waving motion. Now when I'm satisfied with the first pose, which I am right now, I click the left mouse button again and then go down here to save the pose. Because I haven't saved any pose yet, I have to click Create New, then delete this one and type in wave 1. Now I can hit enter and this pose has been saved. And now you can see I can continue with this pose, which is pretty good because the second wave pose that we want to create, it kind of builds up on the first one. So I click the rotate button again, and I'm going to rotate this to over here and then switch to the elbow and click the rotate button again and rotate this over here. I'm just using the D key here, like this, right? Now I'm kind of satisfied with my second pose, and I go to save the pose and type in wave 2, and now I basically have the two key poses for my waving animation that I'm going to implement later on. There's one button that I didn't specifically mention, which is the Move Origin button over here. This basically allows you to create poses where your character is sitting down or jumping up high, and the only thing that it does is it moves the origin of the character. Now we don't really want to do this here, so I suggest you experiment with it on your own. And another thing that's really nice, if you want your character to go back to the standard pose, it makes sense to create an empty pose. So we'll just quickly do that now. I'll just close the pose toolchain. You see that the character reverts back to its initial pose. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to save an empty pose, and I'll call it empty. We're not going to need it in this tutorial, but believe me, it'll come in handy if you want your character to make a certain gesture and then revert back to normal. then it's very good to have this save pose, this pose saved. Now let me navigate back to have a look at the scene again, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the character and the target a little bit backward. For that, I click on the character, press and hold Shift, click on the target, and then I can release Shift. I've selected both of these things. I right click on the character, bring up his menu, and then press the move button, and now you can see that I can move both these objects. Now there's two things I want to do. First, I want the character to rotate towards the camera, so I'm going to create a rotate action over here. And right click on the rotate action, there's two properties that I can set. First, the view target that it should rotate to, and second, the time that Movie Sandbox waits for the character to finish his rotation. Now, because it doesn't really take very long for the character to rotate towards the camera, I'd suggest typing in maybe half a second. So when the character starts rotating, everything that comes here is being halted for 0.5 seconds to give the character the time to finish rotating. Now what I initially wanted to do was make the character wave. So that was the wrong button. I have to click on the node menu here, and then go to set pose, and I'll just put this over here. And because I have two poses that I want to set, I'm actually going to create two of these and just quickly add them to the list like this. Right. Now when I right click on set pose, the first button that you have is the pose name button. When you left click on it, there's all the poses that you actually created in the pose editor using the pose tool. Now the first pose that we want is the wave 1 pose. When you click on it, you see that unfortunately the menu doesn't automatically destroy, but it's still there. But I can assure you, once you clicked set pose nose, and you can safely click somewhere else, like on blend time, and here we type in how long it takes for the character to actually get to that pose. So for example, half a second would be nice, like 0.5 sounds good. So the character has half a second to get from his standard pose that he has now to our first pose. Now let's click on the second pose here and set this to wave 2. Click on the blend time and set this to 0.5 seconds as well. Now if I hit space, you can see that our character walks towards the target, rotates towards the camera, and then sets these two poses. Well, that's no waving motion yet. What we have to do is we have to create a loop between these two poses. And in order to do that, we have to create a white line that goes back from here up here. Now, this is a trick, and you probably won't need that very often. But if you ever run into this situation and you want to create a looping motion, then click on the in node of the beginning of your looping motion, press and hold Shift, move down to the out node of the end of your looping motion, and click again. Now as you can see, we created a situation where the action line runs into the first set pose, then goes to the second set pose, and then goes back up to the first set pose. Now that way, these two things will be executed over and over and over again, and when I hit space, you see what that means. Our character is waving at us. Alright, now I hope you enjoyed the posing tutorial, and I hope to see you in the next tutorial. Goodbye. Maybe we save first, right? Let's save this as posing. Bye bye.